Welcome to the show Brain Rot, What Our Screens Are Doing to Our Minds, a special series from the New Books Network. Here are your hosts, Dr. Karen Messina and Dr. Harry Gill.
So today we're going to continue talking about our psychic structures, the id, the ego, and the superego. And today we'll specifically focus on the id and maybe get to the superego as well. And we're going to tie this, again, as I said, to neuroscience as well as psychoanalytic development. And we're always focusing on Erik Erikson's stages of development. So this is digital deconstruction, how screens reshape our inner world. In the last episode, we talked about the ego, and now we're going to talk about, let's start with the id. Now, the id is the part of us that's wild, has a lot of unmetabolized sexuality to it. It's just like anything, the anything goes part of us. The part that really is not interested in rules or norms. It's just what I want and what I need right now. Anything to add to that, Dr. Gill?
I think it's a good definition. I think people are aware of the term reptilian brain, in which if we're hungry, we will eat, even if it means stealing from somebody else or killing, or a truly unbridled instinct-driven behavior. And those parts of our brain are some of the oldest parts of the brain. They've been around for forever. Apparently, the oldest structures in our brain, evolutionarily, are our areas of perception of smell, which is why we're so sensitive to sense. They're incredibly survival relevant. So if we smell something that is rotten, we're not going to eat it. But also driving the sexual behavior, the pheromones, the attraction, hence multi-billion-dollar perfume industry, because it so matters to us how we smell and how we project ourselves, connected to our previous conversation about ego and a sense of self. Capacity for sexuality and sexual drive, I'm going to start with that drive in particular, very temperamental, very genetically driven, very biologically based. Some people are highly sexual and have sexual needs that include daily sexual activity, sometimes more than once a day. And there are people that are perfectly content having sexual activity once a week. If we go outside of the normal, there are various things that we can talk about in terms of disturbances of sexual drive. But in principle, it's an interesting phenomena that people are just built differently. And oftentimes in my clinical material, working with couples, this can be a source of friction because there is simply a biological difference in the need for sexual behavior that then gets interpreted as rejection or lack of understanding, and it creates real fractures in the marriage. So returning to the biological principle is oftentimes really, really helpful to couples. Similar with aggression, it is something that is very temperamentally built in. It's very difficult to tease apart what is conflict with aggression, which is superego that we're going to talk about more interfering with id, and which part is somebody is simply a mild-mannered person. Some people are very prone to aggressive behaviors. I always say, compare Italians to Swedes. They're just very different people who put together differently. I come from Mediterranean. It is very typical for plates to go flying and stuff to get broken, and very spirited fights and yelling at each other on top of our voices. Perfectly normal, socially acceptable, and very sort of biologically driven, versus a very different kind of both social moray, but also just temperamentally, people that are not prone to expression of aggression, if you will. There's a term of that capacity to express emotional expressivity is also very different. Some people are very flat, and some people are incredibly expressive. So biology and genetics do determine a lot of who we are and how we go about our lives.
Very good point. There's one thing that I think is important, and I'd like to know your thoughts about this. I think that the anonymity afforded by screens significantly lowers inhibitions, and I wonder your thoughts about that in terms of the cultures that you mentioned, because there is anonymity, and we're not accountable to anybody,
Mhm.
um, in a sense, by what we put out there. So all of that pent-up aggression in the form of the id, so to speak, must surface in a different way.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. It wants out. Sexuality wants out. You see a beautiful person, you want to have sex with them, you want to have sex with them. It's the superego that tells you probably not a good idea. I could end up in jail. Or expression of aggression. It's like I want to kill my supervisor. Who didn't think of that idea? Like everybody has a thought about how much they hate somebody and that person should die. Um, I will avoid getting into politics right now, even though it's natural. But so the aggressive and sexual impulses, they are unidirectional. They want out. And the superego serves the function of blocking it and saying, no, 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 not a good idea. Don't do it. Superego is a structure that is developed much later in life and is highly susceptible to screen influences. Influences of parents are increasingly, dramatically, rapidly diminishing. The influence of church has diminished over past decades, which was another source of superego. Do not, covet your neighbor's wife, etc. Various stop, don't do it. Screen, absolutely, you're correct. It creates an environment in which what used to be um, unusual, unacceptable, all of a sudden acceptable and usual. When young people and when they're 16 years old are practicing choking their partners while they're having intercourse at 16 and knowing that choking is an option and it doesn't come to you naturally, but you saw it on the video, so you're doing it, is probably the best sort of very dramatic examples of an influence of something that you have seen on the screen that has entered your superego, and now a certain behavior is not only learned, but it's also permitted.
Yeah, I'd like to take us back to Erik Erikson's stages of development, because what I'm going to say, I wouldn't have said 6 years ago for sure, and definitely not before that. And you can see what you think about the time frame. But this is particularly impactful in the initiative versus guilt stage, roughly ages 3 to 6, where children are learning to plan and carry out activities. If they're exposed to environments where id-driven impulses are unchecked, like anything goes, or they could even be rewarded, it can make it much harder for them to develop healthy initiative balance with a sense of responsibility. And you could see that in children who I'll say are 5 or 6, when they're starting to assume more responsibility. You don't really think of kids having responsibility, but they do. Kindergartners have responsibility. They need to bring their assignments home, or if they're not assignments, their workbooks. I mean, kids have computers in kindergarten now. They need to be responsible for those things. But if this is unchecked, then it starts going awry pretty early.
Spot on. And the influences of screens on the brain development in that particular stage of development are very dramatic. And it was fascinating to me to, I'm going to be very practical for a minute, to study, because I have a small child, that I had to sort of follow his development and figure out technological principles and try to establish some guardrails on the engagement with screens. It is fascinating to me that parents can have the best intentions to protect their child and, for example, differentiate between YouTube and YouTube Kids. Well, YouTube Kids is a pretty awful place if you spend some time looking at what the child can get into, and what kind of material is present in YouTube Kids. Google does not spend much time protecting our children. The other one is the differences between Apple Sphere and Android Sphere in ability to protect the child. Parental protections in Apple Sphere are almost rudimentary. I mean, I have 3 doctorates, actually. I'm a PhD in neuroscience, PhD in psychology, and MD. And it was really hard for me to figure out, then I'm technologically minded, Apple parental controls, and also discovered that you cannot block Siri and you cannot block Safari, so the kids have access to web browser. And if there is ever a dark alley to the neighborhood where you don't want your child to go to, it's any web browser. So while I live in Apple Sphere professionally, my child has an Android pad because a Family Link really allows you to disable the browser, disable YouTube, and really select what the child can be exposed to in order to prevent an example of an actual case where I just did the assessment last week of a 7-year-old girl that got into internet porn and got addicted to internet porn at age 7, which led to traumatization and various behaviors in real life that led into treatment. So examples of not creating guardrails and how damaging it is to developmental superego, which then is unable to inhibit id, meaning these aggressive and sexual drives. It will lead to a child that punches holes in the walls or is running in the middle of the night through their window to have sex with neighbors. These are actual clinical examples. I'm not just making this up theoretically, because there is an internal guardrail that says, you shouldn't be doing this. This is not a good idea. Because they see it. And monkey see, monkey do. I hate the analogy, but we are creatures of mirroring other people's behavior.
That's a very good point. I'd like to reintroduce a word that I've talked about on previous podcasts and our YouTube video channel as well. And I don't like new buzzwords because I think we have plenty of words, but occasionally something comes along that I think is useful. And I do think this word is useful, and it is technoference. And what it means is interference in connections with people. And it starts at a very early age. It could be by very well-intentioned parents. But I think most people know that when you have an infant, it's very important for the sake of attachment to help the child develop a secure attachment, to be connected, to mirror back to the child what you believe he or she is experiencing. If you think it's a tummy ache, you may pick the child up and soothe the child, pat him or her on the back, and say, "It's okay, sweetie, you'll be okay." So you're letting the child know that you understand what's going on in a broad sense, but that you know that they're experiencing trouble. Well, if somebody may be in distress and they think, "Oh, let me go get my phone. I know I just got a message," and they're, scrolling through their phone messages or texts or whatever, and the baby is there in distress. The baby doesn't have words, but it's clueless as to what's going on. So technology is interfering with a connection with another human being. And you can go to the other end of the spectrum. Say you're taking care of an older parent and the parent has asked you something and they might need something. They might need an item, maybe a medication, maybe they want some water. And you say, "Yeah, mom, just a second." And you go to computer and you do the same thing. You scroll through your texts and you have to answer this one and that one and someone else. Well, it's not just a matter of a minute or 2 or 5 when you've left the person who needs something by him or herself. It's what that person is experiencing. I mean, they don't know what's going on, and even if they know what you're doing, it's like, "Oh, but I need this. I really need a glass of water." So there's a connection that's cut there and an opportunity that's lost, and that's one thing that I think we really need to keep an eye on and remediate. Thoughts, Dr. Gill?
Love that. I mean, I chuckle when you said we have enough words. This is a good one. It's interference, but very specific kind of interference. And to emphasize your point on the early development, and back to our old friend Erikson, the development of basic safety, which is a principle that the child needs to experience in the first year of life, leads to development of a sense that world is a reasonably safe place. As I like to say, children with a good basic safety sense, they wake up in the morning and they think, okay, what is this day going to bring? And children that are both for objective reasons, they grow up in traumatized environments, or there's a lot of technoference, and they are wet or they're hungry, and mother is non-responsive because of technoference, mother being whoever the primary caregiver is. It is really complicated, and one has to remember that the child that is hungry is experiencing actual pain. And this is the pain that doesn't go away until they're fed. So they're growing up with a very fractured sense of basic safety. So the world is now not a safe place.
Right.
That group of people, as I like to say, they wake up in the morning and they say, okay, what is this day going to bring? Expecting not great things to happen.
Yeah.
So the power of that first year or two of life and how we are attuned or not attuned to our kids cannot be overstated.
I was just thinking as you were speaking about a child who experiences a distracted parent who's always attending to it. It doesn't have to be always, but it could be continuous or even intermittent. They can start being depressed pretty early. It's just like, as you say, oh no, what is this day going to bring? Now, they don't have those words, but they could easily have a sense of gloom,
Yeah.
like mom or dad, they're not going to be here for me today, just like yesterday. And I was also thinking about adolescents. If you have an adolescent who's willing to ask you a question, that's a pretty big accomplishment because a lot of adolescents don't ask parents questions.
Mhm.
But if you say, yeah, yeah, okay, I'll get to you in a minute, that opportunity, I think, is gone.
Yeah.
They're not going to sit around and wait for mom to get off a 5-minute conversation or a 3-minute email exchange that, yeah, 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 I'll get back to you. That doesn't do it.
There's some really great videos. I think our viewers may be able to find them even on YouTube that has everything. This is pre-telephone, but it was studies of development of infants with depressed mothers. And it shows an infant being fed by mother in a high chair. And the infant that tries to engage the mother and is playful with mother, and mother is responsive, and it's a beautiful thing. And then they play out a different scenario in which mother is not responsive, in this case because mother is depressed, but similarly mother that stares at a screen. And some of the saddest footage is to see the child trying to engage mother, getting more and more agitated and trying to engage mother, and eventually gives up and falls into essentially what we would call infantile depression. So powerful stuff. And thank you for bringing that up.
That reminded me of a conversation that I had with someone recently, a new mom. He was telling me, and this is not a patient, this is just somebody, a friend of a friend. And she was telling me that she really has a very hard time and actually doesn't like breastfeeding her child, and said the only way she could tolerate it is if she watches television at the same time. And very gently, I tried to tell her, well, to figure out a way to tolerate whatever she doesn't like about it. And it might be useful to talk to somebody about it, a specialist of some sort or a therapist, because looking at a baby who is breastfeeding is really important versus watching a television show just so you can tolerate it.
In fact, again, to get practical for a moment, I think there's research that suggests gaze is really what matters more than
Absolutely.
anything. So in cases like this, and if there are people that have this issue, uh, don't hesitate to bottle feed your child.
I was just
It's
thinking
not
that.
a crime against nature.
Yeah.
Bottle feed, put them on your bare skin if possible, and look into their eyes. That's much better than what's happening here.
Yeah. And bottle feeding doesn't mean bottle feeding and watching television
Yes. Yeah.
or doing something with your free hand. It's not what it means.
But
It's gazing.
feeding and eating is such an important aspect of behavior. Looking at animals or primates, eating is a very sacred thing. We're reinforcing our life. We're sharing something. It's completely lost in modern life. But again, we can put some guardrails in there where feeding or eating together
Yeah.
is something that's very important. It used to be, again, I'm not a religious person, but religion that says let's get together and thank the Lord for the food we're about to receive. There's something about that ritual that is quite appealing because it is something that we all worked for, and the parents are providing it for children, and there are sets of values around that versus we're all eating in separate rooms, which is increasingly the case. Everybody's staring at their own screen, eating their own meal, which may not be the same meal, and then we're all puzzled about disintegration of the family.
Well, even if they are sharing this, I agree with you, but even if they are sharing the same meal that mom or dad has prepared and sitting at the same table, they often have some device right by them. So it's interesting to see. I've seen it on television where everybody has their device
Yeah.
that's age appropriate. Maybe little kids have an iPad, but everybody has something.
No longer a shared experience; it's a separate experience.
Right.
Melanie Klein would call it an autistic experience in which you're separated from everybody else
Right.
in your own world and in your own echo chamber, not sharing thoughts, not sharing what happened at school, not being interested in each other, just consuming data, which is my objection to the whole thing.
Mine too. Well, with that, I think it's probably a good time to stop for today. Please join us again for the whole title is Brain Rot, What Our Screens Are Doing to Our Minds. Thanks so much.